Hello, everyone. This is Nelson for GamesMatter, and today I have the great honor of being with the developers behind one of the most well-received GamesMatter games to be featured yet, Sproggywood. Jason Grinblatt. I hope I'm saying that right. Please tell me I'm saying that right. Please,
That
dear
is
Lord.
that is correct.
Okay. Yes. That would be embarrassing. Jason Grinblatt and Brian Bucklew for their new game, hardcore ASCII roguelike Caves of Quud. Sproggywood, it was very much of a kind of simplified, condensed, kind of distilled for people who aren't really used to roguelikes. It's a roguelike for the person who wasn't really into roguelikes, whereas Caves of Quud has a very deep um, underlying gameplay systems, very deep sci-fi based world, and they're going to be walking me through it today. Thanks so much for coming on, guys. How you guys doing?
Happy to be here.
Definitely.
So
Caves
first,
of Cud was actually our first game, though.
oh sweet.
Caves of Cud is going on like 10 years old. Has been out in public since 2010. It just nobody knew about it. It was an old ASCII style roguelike, and so Sproggywood was actually our second game, even though it was the first game most people had heard of.
It was your first commercial release.
Yep. Caves of Cud was available. You could buy a registration key for like $5, and no one did. So in theory, we made like a tiny little bit of money. I mean, it was like 100 registrations over the 7 years between its public release and now. But yeah, I think that, but you couldn't really call that a commercial release. So Sproggywood was our first sort of real commercial foray, trying to build a legitimate studio that actually made games. Because what happened was after many years of working on Caves of Cud, we said, well, we kind of want to do this full time at some point. And while Caves of Cud is awesome, it's going to take us 400 years to finish it, and it might not be the best project to sort of get into the industry with. So we set it aside and sort of put it on pause for a little while. And we said, well, Caves of Cud was a text-based game at that point. And we said, this is not really a very commercially viable thing. We probably should get an artist. A lot of game teams are a programmer and artist at first, and ours is a little unusual because we're sort of a programmer and a writer, and so that
As
I think that
as a
does good
writer,
things.
I think that's the best combination. Just throwing that out there.
It's certainly unusual, and I think it gives our games a lot of really unique and positive aspects, but it makes it really inaccessible when it's just sort of a wall of text. And so we entered a game contest, Something Awful Game Dev, and hooked up with Jana Heiska, who was the artist for Sproggywood, in this game contest, and we actually won the contest. And so that was how we put together the team that built Sproggywood, was me and Jason coming off of Caves of Cud saying, hey, let's put this on hold for a little bit and see if we can get serious. We won that game contest. We worked with Jana to release Sproggywood, and that sort of kickstarted the studio. And based on the success of Sproggywood, we asked Steam, as Valve, if we might be able to release Caves of Cud without going through Greenlight because it had a sort of established following, even though it wasn't particularly commercial. And they said yes. I mean, that was really surprising. They don't usually let games in without Greenlight. So I don't know whether we have a fan inside of Valve or whether we just got them on a good day. But that took a lot of risk off the table for us in terms of making Caves of Cud a commercial project, which we were still a little wishy-washy on because it's such a huge sort of sprawling project, and it's really uncertain. At least it felt really uncertain to me whether it would be able to get through Greenlight. And so not having to go through it, we really committed to getting Caves of Cud out on Steam, and so here we are today. We released it on early access 3 weeks ago, and the reaction has been really positive. So, I mean, here we are today.
Yeah. I mean, not to brag too much here, but it was really great watching, the reception on Steam. And for a while, we kept getting more and more upvotes, positive votes on Steam, and there just kept being no downvotes. And at one point, we had the most upvotes on Steam for a game that had no downvotes. Of course, all good things come to an end, and someone did downvote the game. It's not everyone in the world is going to like Caves of God. I think we're okay with that.
But for
But
those
it's
who
still,
don't, you're going to hunt them down personally.
Yeah, that's
Well,
why.
there's one person right now, so we got 145 positive reviews and one negative review, and that negative review has 56 negative reviews and no positive reviews. So we have a pretty strong positive reaction on Steam. Granted, it's from a niche audience, but I mean that's still really, I mean, pretty fantastic feeling for a developer to have that kind of like just sort of universal acclaim, even in a tiny niche.
So far I've just been building my character by pressing the random button because just all of the different stats and like I'm stuck at the mutation screen because there's literally so many ways to customize your character. It's almost debilitating. Like when you have all of these aspects of customization and you're implementing all that different things, I imagine that it can be difficult to like balance the game when you can have an albino telepathic light manipulating clairvoyant winged angel of death.
I,
Yes.
I think Caves of Cud comes from a place where this was really our first game we ever made. I mean, it's almost, we started in like 2004 or something. And I don't think as more mature game developers we would ever try to do this. The only reason we did this at all is because we didn't know what we were doing was impossible. And so that made us try it. So that's what you're sort of looking like.
So
But what I would say though is that yeah, you're absolutely right, and the game, and especially when you start looking at what some of the abilities do, you know, thankfully for us, like it's often not really a priority for games like this to really be well balanced. And I think that's one of the design sort of mantras here is that we know that players are going, we provide the players with a lot of tools that they can use, and they're probably going to outsmart the game, but we make the game really hard. So it's going to take you a while to figure out how to do that, and you're going to get a chance to be really creative because there are so many ways to do that. And the advice I give for character creation is just it's incredibly daunting because there are so many options. What do they all mean? There are like 70 mutations. I just say like don't get too attached to any character in Caves of Cud. It's certainly going to die. You're going to die often, but that's sort of designed into the game. So what we did is we made a lot of the content available to you right when you start the game. You have all these character creation options. So even if you die, you're going to be able to experience a lot of the game because it's all open to you. And I would just go through and choose mutations that sound interesting to you. If you want to fly around, pick wings. If you want to shoot lasers, pick light manipulation. They're basically something for everyone. So that's how I would suggest making a character.
I think Caves of Cud comes from. I think a lot of people, especially professional game designers, would call it an immature place. I think it's just a different place personally, but it's a kind of game where it is imminently breakable. But I think some of the most fun games, some of the most well received games of all time are like that, where it's not a game that after 2,000 plays you can come back and receive an equitable challenge like something like Chess or Go or any of the other like very gamey style games. But games like Morrowind, I mean, people do 2-minute speed runs of Morrowind abusing the mechanics. But I don't think that that de facto means it's a bad game. I think it's still something that we haven't really well articulated in game design terms, right? I think we're still really focused on gamey game designs.
I
And so
am
I think that right, I think that games that are breakable where part of the game is really exploring a world that you can get creative with that isn't boxed in by some game designer's idea of how you can progress, isn't strictly constrained by how you're supposed to play the game, where that you can take it and use your head to explore the world and interact with it in ways that the game designer didn't necessarily expect, or ways that really change the way the game is played when you finally discover them. Just wrapping your head around that kind of world, learning its physics, learning the way it's played, and really being able to get into the world and leverage it, I think is a kind of game that I really love. I know a lot of people really love because a lot of people love sandboxes and games like Morrowind, and Caves of Cud is sort of from that place. I think that a large segment of its design and success comes from the fact that that's true.
I'm really impressed that the character creation just pressing random gave me a better build than I likely would have picked myself Based off of these stats, what would you suggest for a mutation or
Yeah,
mutations?
actually, I don't. Yeah. Oh, these. Okay. Yeah, interesting. So you do seem to have. You seem to be weighted toward physical stats here. So I would try to build. So we split the mutations up into physical mutations and mental mutations, and you can pick all of one type, all of another, or you can mix and match. So your character seems pretty heavy on the physical stats. So I would pick things that go along with that. So you can have horns. That's a great mutation. Basically, every time you attack, there's a chance that you gut get things with your horns, which is always fun. Stinger is fun. You can have a stinger that has confusing venom or poisonous venom, and you can stick enemies, and they'll run around confused if you have the confused venom. Things like wings are always fun because you have wings. You can fly. You could fly away from ground enemies and they can't hurt you. You travel faster in the overland map. A lot of the mutations have just weird little perks that go along with, what you would expect them to do.
As well as
Uh,
reputation with some of the different factions throughout the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we actually added somewhat recently once we started working on Caves of Cut again was there was already sort of this underlying faction system in the game, but we kind of built on that and exposed it. So one thing about Cut is that it's this weird far future world where it's far after an apocalypse. There's all this like bizarre mutagenic material, and there are these mutants, and a lot of the mutation has caused these basic animals like crabs and apes and cats to sort of be uplifted into sentience. So a lot of these groups of normal fauna and even flora in the world have sort of gathered into a more human-like community. And you can have reputation with all of those groups. There's like 60 of them. And if you have a stinger, for example, the arachnids like you a little more because they kind of see you as one of their own. If you have wings, birds are like, hey, that guy has wings. We're gonna like him a little more.
Hmm. Trying to think of. I picked up multiple arms regeneration. Now I'm just thinking, what do I use my last 3 points for? And I can get more points if I give myself defects, right?
That's correct. You can pick up a defect in order to be able to get more physical mutations, but the defects are also just they aren't necessarily even strictly negative because of the points they give you. They just tend to change the game in a complicated way.
Like you can't wear helmets if you have a beak, but you occasionally peck at your opponents.
Right. And they do give you a good amount of points back, and they often give you a bonus to a faction. And so I tend to think of them more as sort of character complexification rather than necessarily pure drawbacks.
That sounds like a big word.
So
Complexifications.
one favorite defect of people, it's actually a mental defect though, is evil twin. If you want to take a look at that one.
Yeah, the one where there's a small chance that a parallel version of yourself has tracked you down and attempts to destroy you. And it's
That's right.
interesting that all of these different things, even when you're just reading the descriptions, you sense that there is a much large, just even in the character creation screen, you have the sense that there's a much larger world you're about to be stepping into when you hear about artifacts and gaining reputation with arachnids and all these different sci-fi elements, such as the evil twin coming to destroy you. Like, you feel a tangible sense that you're stepping into something special. Was that something you wanted to create from the beginning? And was it something that you're almost afraid that you wouldn't be able to live up to players' expectations in some respect because they built up something in their mind from the very first moment?
I I think no. I mean, I think we were very well aware of that, and in particular, like I think roguelikes have a tradition of having a great wealth of character creation options. That's one of the things that kind of goes hand in hand with permadeath is that yes, you're dying permanently when you die, but at the same time, we're gonna draw back quite how brutal that is because we're gonna not really make you have to unlock a bunch of things. You're gonna have a lot of it exposed to you right away. And we really like that about the roguelikes we played, and we really like that about this actual pen and paper role-playing game called Gamma World, that was the primary inspiration for Caves of Cut. It was, again, takes place after a nuclear fallout, is has characters that are mutants, and one of the most fun things about Gamma World is rolling a character, because there are just a ton of mutations. There are a ton of different things that happen to your character during character creation that make it really weird, and you end up with like a psionic pelican that has like infested with like a symbiotic fungus, and you're like, okay, what the hell is going on here? So we really wanted to kind of really draw on that idea of like, here is like the idea of like character diversity, character creation options. We just wanted to go wild with that. Like, this is a game that's really premised on you playing whatever type of character you can imagine. And we wanted to like give you dump all of that into your lap right from the get-go and just see what you can do with it in the world.
And I really like how you can gain reputation with trees and roots. I always thought that would be fun.
Yeah, there are quite a few factions that are kind of unexpected. I mean, you don't expect trees to dislike you necessarily, but it can happen in Caves of God.
So, but if I have that reputation with the trees and then I decide to chop down a bunch, that might be affected a bit.
It could, especially if you find a unique named tree, and he sees you chopping down trees, or you attack him. He might not like that, and your reputation with trees might go down.
Right, or if you bring a gift to a hero amongst trees. Those are the kinds of things that will affect. There's a question in chat. They're curious where you got your inspiration for themes of Caves of Cud. I know, Jason, you have a bunch of inspirations. Game World was not the only inspiration. It was one, especially in the context of the character creation system, but there were also a lot of things that I particularly didn't like, and I know Jason had some other things he didn't like. I always thought the actual setting of Game World was always the weak spot for me. Like, I don't really like the sort of very funny immediately after the post-apocalypse, you're like wandering around in the mall in New Jersey kind of setting. And so we sort of set out to create something that took some strengths of Gamma World, but also some strengths of a lot of other inspirations.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
On the horizon, Cud's jungles strangle chrome steeples and rusted archways to the earth. Further and beyond, the fabled spindle rises above the fray and pierces the cloud-ribbon sky. This is good writing. This is very good. I'm impressed.
Thank you very much.
So, as a writer, what was the process like for you? Because I know, at least personally, whenever I assist a project, I always feel a little bit unworthy compared to perhaps like the programmer or another member of the team who has a very great technical ability.
We definitely don't have that problem.
Yeah, I mean, Brian's definitely like the technical genius on the team, I would say. I actually have a technical background. I was a programmer too. So, I mean, and we kind of share responsibility. It's the type of thing with a tiny team, which for Caves of Cud was 2 people, and then we have a close friend who was very instrumental too. He was the main play tester and helped with the design. But I mean, we're doing a lot of the design nowadays. I'm doing more of the programming. Brian does a lot of the original writing, and he knows very well that he can write something, and I'm like anal retentive enough that I have to look at it. So if he wants something like written for the game, instead of just asking me to do it, he'll write it, and then he'll try to put it in the game, and I'll be like, okay, no, I have to like edit this now. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's something that, weird, bizarre, offbeat settings are really important to us. We kind of have a pen and paper role-playing game background where we would play games with these sort of elaborate, richly cultured, like built-up settings, and we really wanted to emulate that in our game. We really, kind of like the idea of this like rusted Fallout-esque world, even though Cud does get compared to Fallout a lot, was not quite what we were going for. We wanted something that was a little just more alien. Like, I think we were talking earlier about Morrowind, and that was one of the inspirations too. Just the way with the world of Morrowind and Vardenfell just feels like an alien place compared to the rest of the Elder Scrolls universe. We really like that, and so we drew from a lot of inspirations, like things like Gene Wolfe and the Robert E. Howard, the Conan stories, like the early sword and sorcery stuff, and Canticle for Leibowitz, a lot of some old sci-fi that we like a lot. Morrowind, the Gamma World, Dune. I think there's really an influence that Dune has on the world and the writing. So we kind
And I mean,
of
even the mythology of Gilgamesh, right? I mean, I think that even 10 years ago, we were sick of rundown brown ruins. And CUD, to a great extent, is an attempt to build a world that feels burgeoning, that is not a world that's in ruin, but is a world that's beginning to burgeon. The kind of feeling you get when you look at those really old mythologies where you've got little towns in the midst of this great burgeoning wilderness, and right across the horizon is just completely unknown, right? And I don't think that's the way most fantasy worlds feel nowadays, whether it's Fallout, where you just sort of like these expansive brown ruins, or whether it's, traditional D&D mythology where you kind of know you're going to go find a ruin and go down dungeon delving. We wanted to capture a feeling that really harkens back past medieval times and into deep history, where you had this really unknown fog of war around you as soon as you walked out of town. And because that's the kind of world that really I'm interested in exploring, right? Not one where I feel super comfortable when I set off, but one where when I go to the next screen, I'm really pretty uncomfortable with what I'm about to see. I just don't know for sure that anything could be around the corner. It's not necessarily a ruin, but some new life, right? Some burgeoning world.
So,
And so I think a lot of people project a sort of Fallout post-apocalypse on Caves of Cud at first, which is understandable because that's sort of the common world that people are exposed to. But when you get out into it, it's not that. It's not a world immediately post-apocalypse. It's a world that's been through that in the distant past, probably, but a world that's really beginning to come alive in a really serious way on its own terms, and not as the ruins of something old, but as the real beginning of something new. Sort of a liminal space between those two times.
pony up 30 drams of fresh water. So water is very valuable in this world, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
Yes.
water's actually the currency of the world. So it like a lot of roguelikes here, you actually have to maintain your hunger and thirst, so you have to eat and drink. In this game, it's sort of there's the extra challenge of the fact that you have to drink your money because water both sustains you and also is your currency. So you have to be careful not to drink all your money or you'll be poor. Or you also have to be careful not to trade for too many items because then you'll be thirsty.
I love how it doesn't stick to a strictly roguelike conventions as far as art style. Like that was very difficult for me to decipher the whole @ sign and all that different stuff. I like how you.
Well, try this. So if you stop moving for a minute and go into options, one
Yeah.
of the UI options is tiles, and you can for a moment flip it off and look at the traditional look and feel compared to the new tiles. So these new tiles are made by an artist, Sam Wilson, who obviously
Oh
I
dear Lord.
love the work. I think that he has done a really awesome job of capturing the aesthetic because he was originally a player and a fan of this kind of ASCII.
Oh yes.
And so I think that he read the world in to a large degree the same way that we did, and was able to keep the core aesthetic, that really simple aesthetic that lets you hang your imagination on it, while building something that is not as immediately inaccessible as ASCII, right? Something that you really can, if you're interested, pick up and play, whether or not you've ever played a roguelike before.
So the fact that both of you come from a technical background, has that assisted in the development of Caves of Cud? Sorry, I always want to do the queen notes. Cud. It's Cud. Chewing the cud. Go. Sorry.
I mean, a lot of the original engine. Brian did most of the original engine work, and so I think we didn't have a great workflow in the early days. I would sort of like tell him some content to put in. I think I used a lot of I was using a lot of my technical background for design purposes, right? So I was like figuring out like good XP curves and like, just thinking of like how we want to balance mutation progression, that sort of thing, and then all of the actual technology in the game Brian was doing. So I think it's good in that respect because a lot of design is at least if whether you want to call it technical or mathematically rigorous, it's one of those things. And nowadays that we have a better workflow, using Git, and I can just do my own additions to the game, writing the code, and then if I have, what'll happen is I'll come back to Brian and be like, I kind of want to put this in. What do you suggest? Or like set this up for me so it's not going to take me like 10 months to do it because I want to do it sooner than that. And I definitely think it's valuable.
I also think, I mean, we're a small independent studio. We're effectively a startup, and I think in any resource-constrained startup, you need everybody to be a generalist. And so I think all of us are capable. I mean, even in Sproggywood, where Yana was also an extremely strong game designer and technician in addition to an artist. And so I think that really the only way you can survive in the context of a small startup is for everybody to be a generalist. Doesn't mean everybody doesn't have specialist expertise, but you just don't have the orchestration to have specialists contribute to a project like that. Everybody has to be all in on the project in order to make it work at all, just because you're so resource constrained.
And you can read every book in here.
Yes, if you can find a book.
Yeah.
I'm watching. It's a little laggy, but I'm watching you murder the zealot right now.
I remember when it was in its earliest version, you were like, "Oh, you can murder this dude, and there won't be any consequences." And just the fact that I did it almost automatically when you told me that made me realize something about myself.
It's a game of self-exploration.
And that's interesting. Like when I think it goes back to, again, when you go back to stuff like Morrowind and etc., when you don't have an explicit thing telling you, okay, this will reduce your morality, this will make you good or bad, it kind of it reflects more upon you as a player. Like when nobody's watching, what will you do? Did you consciously want to put those moral conundrums into the game, not only in that manner, but also in the reputation thing? Like, who do you want to be in good graces with?
Yeah, I think, harkening back to Gamma World again, they had this really interesting faction system or it wasn't really so much of a faction system, but they had these interesting factions in the world that were sort of, that like occupied very, very unique spaces in the world. And we really like that. We like this idea of, we have this like far future world, we have this, but that's juxtaposed, is like Brian was saying, this sort of almost Gilgamesh-esque ancient world, but that's juxtaposed with this like super advanced technology it's been so long that our relationship with it is sort of akin to magic. So there are the people who there are the factions of people who like revere that technology as if and like the ancient artificial intelligences as sort of gods and sort of worship it. There are the tinkers of the world who are trying to sort of restore that technological splendor back to the world of COD. There are these mutants, these what they call glowites, where they just like indulge in mutation and they want to like basically transform themselves into these mutant chimeras of like just like ghastly form. That's all something that like there's a lot of different representations of what's going on in this world and like how the world really interacts with technology. And we wanted players to we had an incredibly ambitious original conceit for the game where you would join any number of these factions. Over time, that sort of got honed down to the main plot where you seek out this faction called the Barathrumites. But you can gain favor or ill repute with any number of the factions of the game, no matter how important they are. So we really wanted to give the player the sort of option to to sort of think of themselves in this world however they might do it. You know, if you're hated by trees, I think that gives you like a sort of very real, like visceral image in your mind about what that might mean. It asks you some questions, right? Like, why are you hated by trees? Like, what could you have done to really have caused trees to hate you this much? So it sort of implants these questions into your head that are help you sort of conceptualize your character.
Dismember limbs and regenerate limbs. Mmm, yummy.
Yeah,
Maybe the
there's a
best
lot of
debug option.
yeah. There, it's an important debug option. I actually was fixing some issues with it, and it was very important for me to be able to quickly dismember and regenerate myself.
And that raises an interesting thing. Like when you have all of these variables interacting with each other, what is the most interesting bug you encountered? Like something you're like, I didn't know that would happen. That's interesting.
Oh, I mean, you see them all the time. I mean, in early days, there's like a full temperature simulation, and so getting that to propagate heat was a little tricky. And so for a long time, if you got a square too hot, like down in a cave, all of the like the rock cave walls would catch on fire, and eventually the whole thing would just melt to lava. We've had issues where like evil twins under some circumstances would spawn to the point where the whole screen would just be completely filled with evil twins, which was obviously a challenging encounter.
There's a
I
funny
don't
issue now where if you actually, in the town you're in, if you go look at one of the, yeah, so if you go over to the middle of the screen, actually, right in the town, you're in Jopa, not in the world map. But basically what we do on a couple of the characters, we procedurally generate these backgrounds and these relationships with the factions in the world. Yeah, so if you actually went back to Jopa, the town you were in, you would see that there are a couple of the characters. There's a warden, and he sometimes he'll get procedurally generated with, you know, is hated by the actual villagers of Jopa, which is the town he's a warden of. So that's pretty funny because what'll happen there is that he'll come and just slaughter one of the farmers, in fact, that first quest giver, and then you can't get that first quest because he's been killed by the warden. But so yeah, that's pretty funny. If you look, L is usually the bounds. Yeah. So if you look at Warden Ulrag, there's a description here, and you see he's loved by the Fellowship of Wardens, but he's also disliked by Kragmensch, which is a race in the game, for tricking them into sharing their fresh water. So that part's all actually procedurally generated. He could be liked or disliked by any number of the factions in the game for any number of reasons. Sometimes it just so happens that he's disliked by the guy that's right next to him, and they get into a fight right when the game starts.
So I'm coming to Red Rock to try to complete that quest. Looking seems to be very important in this game, so that you know what you're getting into.
Yeah, I think more people should do it. You know, a lot of people, it's sort of important in roguelikes where a lot of this art is representational. We can't really, you know, it's a little better with tiles, but especially with you know, ASCII, you're just sort of encoding a lot of meaning in this world into this single character, and so sometimes you want to elaborate on that, and the way you do that is through like a look description, which might also give you access to some of the other attributes. So yeah, I mean, if you look, you're going to see a few things. You're going to see things like the you know, vague health and hostility and toughness of a monster, but you're also going to see like a description of the monster, which, you know, hopefully is flavorfully cool, but also can potentially be helpful, and also you can learn things about the world that'll just give you a better understanding and like potentially help you in game.
And I'm seeing a lot of dice rolls going on. Were you inspired by the old classics like Morrowind, like Dungeons and Dragons, to use like D6s and etc.?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, that's where I think a lot of our original, you know, actually at the same time we were developing Caves of Cud, we were actually working on a tabletop role-playing system that took place in sort of the same world. Actually, Caves of Cud is one region in the world that was originally called Freehold, which is sort of the name of our studio now. So a lot of that design had come from our experience with playing pen and paper role-playing game where to do damage you roll dice, and you know that has been sort of repeated in game design as well. So more recent, I mean, we haven't been doing as much of it recently. Like not all of the damage in the game is dice based, but yeah, that's certainly a big inspiration.
Well, holy crap! These seed-spitting vines are. They literally murdered me. The cave spider, no. But the vines murdered me? That's
Yeah, the
not
vines are
pleasant.
quite dangerous. Basically, almost everything is dangerous, but the vine, oh, yeah.
I scored
So
negative 350 points. Is that good for my first time?
Yeah,
it could
I
be
would say
lower.
yes. Yeah, I've seen people with negative thousands.
And I like how you guys give the option to replay my most recent character. Let's try Truekin. Like, how many people do you see usually choose Truekin rather than these crazy mutations?
Well, we actually collect anonymous analytics on gameplay. You can turn that off if you want to. So we can see in the aggregate how often people are picking things like Truekin versus mutants. We can also see things like how often each mutation is selected. And so we've in our current data set we've got about 28,000 mutants to about 9,000 Truekin. So it's a relatively big skew, right? It's more than 3 to 1 mutants to Truekin, which is not particularly surprising. I think that Truekin are interesting to play. They have stronger starting gear. It can often be a stronger starting character, especially if you pick one of the warrior classes like Praetorian. They get more skills, which are often good for your character in terms of flexibility. But we have some ideas for Truekin complexity that aren't in the game, whereas a lot of the mutated human ideas that we had are. And so they tend to be a little flatter as characters, so I don't think it's too surprising to me that Truekin are played much less.
And I am just going on a rampage simply just to see what happens. Um,
So the farmers are not defending themselves, huh? That seems like a bug.
oh, they are defending themselves. I think I got hit. Did I get hit? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure they're...
Well, what do you? I guess that would be an interesting question. What is the difference between a bug and a feature, especially in this game?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of complicated interactions, right? Especially with the faction system. But I would expect them to defend each other because they should be friendly to one another. And when something that's friendly sees something that it's friendly to attacked, it should try to defend it. So if they're not defending each other, there's an issue with the faction code that
Yeah,
you've unveiled.
exactly. And that was probably, the factions are one of the biggest systems that are in that one of the newest and biggest systems that we're constantly iterating and adding to. So it's very, very likely we just broke something. And these farmers are maybe the farmers just aren't really, maybe that these farmers didn't like that guy. That's also a possibility.
Uh,
He was just kind of like, we'll let him take
Me-
care of that guy.
Mehmet is he's disliked by crabs. He's hated by oozes for poisoning their fresh water. So, like, as a teenager, he just kind of went for a joyride with his friends and ended up taking off the oozes.
I'd like that interpretation. I think that, yeah, I mean, Mehmet's kind of a jerk, is what I'm gathering from this.
And he's neutral now, rather than
Yeah,
friendly.
this is sort of like a teenage ruffian Mehmet who really just has made a lot of enemies in his youth.
He's disliked by crabs for giving one of their kind an unfavorable horoscope reading. So you can't even be blamed for that. That's really the alignment of the stars.
Hmm. Kill as many of these critters as you can. Oh, so this is a different quest. I'll do as you ask. Yeah, I think in the beginning, Mehmet, he wasn't alive because he's colored differently than the dude who's in the cave, who's asking for artifacts. Am I
Oh
wrong?
yeah, he's another that's our guy. So the guy in the southwest corner of the map gives some more quests as well. But it's very likely Mehmet was dead because, like I was saying, sometimes the warden slaughters him. The villages in Cud are often just on the like brink of total social meltdown. There's another village later in the game that you get to, and you can do things which players have done, like manipulate the like sort of social dynamics in the game by like training a monster into town and then there's a hunter with a rifle. Sometimes he'll shoot at the monsters that you train into town, and sometimes he'll miss and he'll hit like the mayor of the town. And the mayor gets really angry at him, and he'll come like charging at him to attack him. And then some of the other villagers come in his defense, and basically you have like a civil unrest on your hand. And oftentimes they'll sort of kill each other, and you can kind of clean up after them and steal some of their items. But again, this gets back to your morality question, whether this is the type of character you feel comfortable playing.
Whoa, oh man, it's really dark.
Yes, you should probably equip a torch. So if you go to I, to your inventory, you start with some torches.
Okay. So yeah, some interesting stuff I've been seeing. Were you ever afraid that players wouldn't take to Quud's world?
I think the biggest barrier is the difficulty. I think we haven't had really much feedback at all that people don't like the setting and the world once they explore it some. There are people who kind of like I think they're not used to really the kind of aesthetic of permadeath, and that the idea behind the kind of one of the motivating factors behind roguelikes is that dying can be fun. Like dying, that's the mantra of Dwarf Fortress as well. You learn from dying. You start again with knowing more. Some players just see dying as just bad. It's just like a negative experience. So for them, it's sort of you're going to die a lot in Caves of Cut. That's just sort of true.
I think it's also interesting.
People,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's also interesting that a lot of people think that if a game has lore, therefore this is going to be a free form, very long, a game that you play for a very long time, right? Whereas if it doesn't have as much story in it, so they're like, oh, that's a roguelike. You don't miss as much when you are killed. And so has that also been a reason that people have kind of reacted negatively to death, because it feels like there's so much lore that they shouldn't be dying, that they shouldn't be starting from the beginning every single time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that does play in for it. And, to be perfectly honest, I think this is an area where we can improve. Because one of the things CUD does really, really well is that it really sort of, the design, the fact that we expose so much to the player right away, the fact that you have all these diverse character creation choices really goes hand in hand with the permadeath. Because one of the opportunity costs of not dying, of progressing into the mid and late game, is that you don't get to play the early game again. You don't get to solve the same puzzles with different tools. You don't get to see parts of the early game that you missed. CUD really says, you're going to be spending a lot of time, just exploring around the hills, the canyons, the forest around Jopa, around the next city. There's a lot for you to see there. And the fact that you're dying a lot is okay, because there's so many different new characters you could roll, so many different character concepts. So that's all. I think we do that really well. The one thing that I think we can improve on is that we have this grand sort of story and this setting and this plot that you go through that we really love. But that you do have to sort of gain a mastery of the game to progress through. So we are sort of culling down the number of players who are going to see that content because the game is pretty brutal. So I would like to see us take even more of that lore and more of that plot and shift it to where it's exposed to more players, while keeping this idea that permadeath is okay. Playing many characters, rolling a new character over and over is fun, but at the same time you do learn about the game, and you get better and better at it, and you'll live longer and longer.
And I think there's a lot of ways to do that. I think it's primarily just resource constraint that prevents us from implementing them all. For instance, you could certainly imagine being able to expose a much higher surface area of game content via this horizontal play by having multiple starting areas and different starting quests. But it's just such an unbelievable amount of content. I mean, it already takes 50 to 80 hours of sort of from the start to where you get to the point where you get to the end of the piece of the one main quest that we've implemented, and that main quest is like half done, and we've been working on it for N years. And so it is just an unbelievable labor to add all this tooling. And I think that the more we build out horizontally, the longer we leave this main plot unfinished and people can't finish it and feel bad, right? And so there's this continuing tension between continuing to add horizontal variety to the early game and completing the deep lines that each of those new horizontal varieties are going to add. That, like, that's an exponential combination of content, of which we still haven't finished the very first segment. So I mean, it's just like, we decided it's a pretty reasonable thing for us to part-time make Skyrim, basically, and we're paying for that youthful hubris still.
And one thing I would say, just one last thing about that, is that, I think that the impulse is to say, well, the game is too hard and I can't progress, so I'm not going to experience the rest of the game, and so it's not worth it for me to play. But I would just say, just rolling a bunch of characters and exploring the area around you, you're seeing a lot of the content, and that's by design. So just, I would take the approach of, like, I want to play some weird mutant. I want to just go around and look around this world and kind of explore and see what I could find. Just by doing that, you're really doing what we want you to do. So I wouldn't even, like, if you're the type of player who's doesn't feel like, progressing through the main quest, if you're gonna have to die a lot, you're not gonna get far, and that's gonna frustrate you. I would just say, like, you can totally enjoy COD, and many players do. I do often when I just go back and play, just by rolling a bunch of different characters, seeing what you can do with them, combining the mutations in interesting ways, and just exploring, like, the early areas of the game. That itself is pretty enjoyable.
And now, as a developer of a ASCII roguelike yourself, do you have a higher standard for games in the same genre, like what you will play?
I'm really terrible at most of them. Like, as a player, I'm not cautious enough, and so I usually just die. Like, I'm good only at FTL, and only because I didn't know you could pause until I was able to beat the boss without pausing. And so that was an amount of attention grabbiness that really stuck to me. I really stuck to FTL for a couple hundred hours because of that. But most other games, I just can't. I'm really a very bad roguelike player because I'm just incautious. And so I don't think. I mean, for me, I just have fun with games. Like, I'm a very voluminous consumer of game content, and I don't feel like I have super high moral standards for my video games of any genre. I just like to have fun.
What about you, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually sort of agree with that. Like, I think we're, it's funny because we just Brian and I just attended the International Roguelike Developers Conference. It was the first one of its kind in America. It's been happening in Europe for a few years at this point, and one of the things, we didn't really know what to expect. One of the things that was really like a pleasant surprise and just really great was that we saw that the roguelike, even the small conference that only like 30 so people attended, there was so much diversity in among those people and in the talks that were given and in the conversations that were had, that we realized that, like, I think there's a lot of room in the roguelike space for a lot of all sorts of interesting things. I think it's a very compelling form for a number of reasons, and the way that people have sort of iterated and elaborated and sort of diverged from that form are all interesting as well. So I'm not the type of person who's going to look at something and say, like, that is not a good roguelike, that is not a real roguelike. I mean, there are ones that I like and that inspired us, but certainly. But I think that some of these things, and I think we're seeing this just in gaming in general, are sort of propagating out to more mainstream gaming. There are a lot of roguelikes and roguelike likes and roguelites, and people are seeing the interesting things here, especially around procedural generation and sort of embedding them into new environments.
If you want to get philosophical, I think ultimately one of the things that really drives roguelikes is their procedural nature. I think a lot of the stuff that surrounds roguelikes is ultimately just sort of a historical artifact. And I think it's the fact that what we're seeing in every field is a move towards really leveraging computer intelligence to help us, to assist a human designer in creating something. And that's true everywhere, right? You're seeing the explosion of big analytical data, of artificial intelligence systems in all places doing work. And procedural game content is just that applied to games. It's the confluence of computer intelligence with human design to do more interesting work than you can do alone. And the procedural tools are a toolkit that's, I think, really started in the context of roguelikes and Elite and has sort of been bubbling under the surface. Roguelikes are clearly really built on that procedural content, but it's starting to leak over, and it will leak over more and more. I don't think ultimately that human creativity has anything unique about it, right? I think that ultimately the confluence of human creativity and computer procedural systems will just let us eventually do these huge games without having to do it all by hand and without everybody's experience having to be the same static experience. And so I think we're just at the very beginning of that curve, and roguelike's popularity is because it was one of the first genres that started to really exploit that confluence between human productivity and creativity and computer productivity and creativity in order to make video games. But video games is not the only place that's happening, and turn-based dungeon crawls are not the only place that confluence is going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting everywhere, right? So, I think that at a deep philosophical level, that's what's going on, and part of what's driving roguelike's popularity and its interest as a sort of art form. And I also think it's why it's so challenging to pin down what a roguelike means, because it's starting to sprawl all over. But the sprawling that is definitely core roguelike is all procedural, right? And it's really, I think, at its heart, that procedural confluence that is important and is what's going everywhere. If you look at a game like Shadow of Mordor, right? That's a very mainstream AAA game that suddenly has this very powerful procedural storytelling element, right? The Nemesis system, the relationship of those orcs to one another and the way that you can influence it means you can create a procedural story that is different for each person and leverages the computer's ability to issue creative direction on demand, right? Based on some input by a human, right? They've designed the system, but ultimately the computer is running it. And that's becoming very interesting to mainstream games. You look at a game like Watch Dogs, right? Another very mainstream game that uses procedural storytelling and its citizen backstories to a very effective degree. And, I think that that's a trend that is not going to stop. I don't think that there's any reason to expect that in 50 years you will be playing games that are mostly human curated content. I think they will be mostly computer generated and better for it, because there won't be predictable. They will be interesting stories told by procedural systems, but ones that can shape themselves to you, that can help, that not only that, but can be responsive to you as a player. And I think that's another thing that roguelikes and procedural systems do well that a hand-curated adventure game like King's Quest can't, which is allow the player to be involved in the story, right? I think that the development, especially of Let's Plays and Twitch streams where people are getting out and showing games, has big effects on how you make games. And I think that the player being able to involve themselves in the creation of the story via procedural story generation is a really important one. I think the ability to hide content, right? Content that almost no one is going to see, and it's still interesting because now you've got signal boosting Let's Players. So you've got rare content in old AAA games where everybody plays through it. You want to spend every dollar on content that every person is going to see. But now you can actually build these very interesting little Easter eggy corners of the world that are interesting because maybe one YouTuber will see it, a bunch of people will see it, and want to get in and have that happen in the game and have something rare like that happen to them. And that starts to open up new game design space that was not accessible 10 years ago, right? And so there's all kinds of interesting things going on in the context of roguelikes that I think will unfold into the adjacent genres and then eventually to all games as a whole, and are definitely already happening. I mean, that's not any kind of crazy future prediction. That's happening today in AAA games.
That's absolutely incredible. So you're on early access now. People can buy your game and feed your children. That's a good thing.
Sure.
So how is your experience with, I guess, early access been thus far?
It's been really good for us. I think so. As far as feeding the children, we're really happy. It's actually, Caves of Cud in early access is actually performing better than Sproggy would, which on the one hand is a little surprising to us, but on the other hand, Caves of Cud has a lot of development time and love put into it. Like Brian was saying, this has been our hobby project time. As far as I think Caves of Cud's a really good fit for early access because, we say this in our early access FAQ where there's so much that can kind of go on. It's such a giant sandbox with so many options that it's really critical, even more so than more games, that we hear player feedback and that we sort of tweak the game based on that because, players will often find strategies that are just so beyond the type of what we would think to have done. And there's just
form those strategies, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but do you think to form those strategies, it's vital to have alongside that procedural nature some actual predictability, to know that every time you fight a snapjaw shotgunner, they're going to have this or whatever, this certain behavior. Do you think that's vital, especially in a procedurally generated game?
Yeah, I mean, I think, even more broadly than that, I think, while I agree with what Brian was saying, we are at a point now where the best content, the best sort of procedural content comes with really a lot of human curation, especially you were talking about being a writer. I'm a writer. I like to embed, tell my own stories and tell the story sort of we want to tell and not just to leave it to the procedural god, so to speak. And this sort of sameness that sometimes people complain about I just saw Mehmet die from the Warden. The sameness that sometimes people complain about from pure procedural content, I think we are at a point where when you mix good procedural algorithmic, construction with really good handcrafted, Tanya Short, who's a game designer, calls them units of meaning. You can get a really, really great output. And having things like not only consistent behavior where the player, has a touchstone and knows what to expect from certain things in the world and can build on their own knowledge and know that it's not all just random gibberish, but also things like, consistent themes that you're embedding into this procedural world, even if they're combining in a procedural way to tell a unique story, it's a consistent theme that you've sort of put in, sort of embedded into the content through that sort of hand-curated content. So yeah, I think having that is kind of paramount, actually.
Okay, I'm frozen. Solid. That is awesome. So what have the reactions been like in early access, and what are your hopes for the future of Caves of Cud, aside from giving you the ability to develop other amazing products? Because you guys have made some great stuff.
I mean, I think we would like eventually to be able to make games sustainably full-time, even if they're small ones. I mean, that's sort of the MacGuffin all the indie studios are chasing. To do it with relative creative freedom, though you're always going to have to deal with market forces. The reality is that Sproggywood and Caves of Cud aren't really providing that income. I mean, neither of them was largely commercially successful. Caves of Cud was more successful than Sproggywood, but even together, it doesn't produce an amount of income that lets us really consider full-time work. So at the moment, we're sort of digging in and letting that war chest build up because it has some income, just not enough to pay us full time, and trying to figure out what path is going to take us to sort of creative independence. And the reality is that almost every overnight success is a decade of just interminable anonymous toil. And so I think we're just working through that decade, right? We're 3 years into it, so we've got another 7 years before we're instant successes. And I think it's a matter of making sure that we produce really quality content to make sure that we draw the right line between just being an art house and making games that people want to actually play. And I think very importantly, making games, very important to me, making product that even if in the end commercially we aren't successful, that I can look back and say, man, I'm pretty proud that that's my life product. And I think so far with Sproggywood and Caves of Cud and even our little contest games, I can look at them and say, I'm proud I made that, right? I'm happy that I made that, and even without financial success, that's a feather in my soul that makes me happy, right? And I want to make sure that the work we do every time does that, because otherwise I don't think games is the right place to be, right? If it was just paying bills, you shouldn't be making games, right? And so I think it's really important to make good stuff that adds positively to the world. Even
I like how Brian's giving this impassioned speech about being proud of the work he's done well on the screen. Your frozen solid is being you're just like,
this is probably my proudest moment.
So if you're playing with a numpad, it'll just be like 5 on your numpad or whatever you have bound to pass. You can pass, and your temperature should start to come back to the ambient temperature.
Yeah, you want to wait is the command to
yeah.
wait. You could also hit tilde or.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, it's coming down.
Yep, he got some cheap shots out of me So since I'm encased in ice, technically I won't get thirsty, right? No, that's not how it works.
Oh, if you're cased in ice.
That's a good point, man.
Yeah,
If you're frozen, your hunger and thirst shouldn't increment. I'll patch that in tonight.
And so that really is another great thing about early access. Like, you can iterate very quickly.
Yeah, I mean,
Caves of Cud was like the worst technical launch ever. It was very crashy. It was a bunch of stuff that we didn't turn up in beta. The port to Unity was just a nightmare because of its garbage collector. And not only that, because we have so much content to add, there's certain niceties like save game upgrades that we're just not going to do because it's time consuming and creates a lot of cruft in the code, that especially the code this old, that we're just sort of throwing caution to the wind and iterating at full speed. If it was a real release game, I wouldn't be comfortable doing that, right? So it sets a certain standard that lets us move quicker in terms of game content production that I think is right for a game like Caves of Cud.
Right. Because the thing about Caves of Cud is that it's like the surface area of what you can do is giant, and sort of what necessarily comes with that is some buggy behavior. So it's not this like sort of clean, well cordoned off, hermetic place where, there's some amount of gameplay and we're reasonably confident that it's bug free. It's more like there's an insane amount of things you could do, and for that insane amount of space, we're actually pretty happy with how many bugs there are. But because you could do things like clone yourself, mind control your clone, and then like hack off your own limb and trade it to a merchant, and then buy it back as your original character and eat it. This is all just stuff that you can just do in Caves of Cud. So you expect that somewhere along the way, when you're like fully simulating all your monsters and you're giving them body parts that could be cut off, you're giving them like your minds that you can mind control, there might be a hitch along the way. So I think like early access is a great place where we can say it's just a good fit for us where we can say like, expect some weird behavior occasionally, but at the same time, go have a ball doing all these crazy things.
That's absolutely awesome. So I want to thank you guys so much for your time. We went a little bit over time, but you guys just like had some really fascinating stuff to say. We're going to be distributing these surveys. If you enjoy Caves of Cud or not, filling out these surveys, this survey really helps. These are the questions that the devs thought were really important to ask, so we're giving them to you. Any final words? Anything you'd like to say in closing?
Brian, you go first.
Thanks for having us. I mean, I had fun. That was great. I hope you guys that are getting keys have fun playing it. We had a lot of fun making them.
Yeah, and again, yeah, thanks for having us. If you play Caves and Cutting and you like it, please go and tell us your story. I mean, like there are a few forums. There's a subreddit. There's the Steam forums. We have forums on our website. And we always like to read player stories because they're often pretty like surprising things that we wouldn't have thought of ourselves.
I was reading about a dude who he had some crazy setup to where he could set up turrets almost remotely with his mind, and he could like take them apart like within instance. It was insane. It was awesome.
That sounds pretty awesome.
And did you expect those things to come up?
Oh, there's all sorts of like strategies people talk about that. No, I mean like that strategy I was explaining to you about, drawing monsters into the town. So the one rifleman shoots the mayor and shoots the other warden and starts a brawl. I mean, that's that was not intended. That's sort of just an emergent property of some of the monster AI, and there are a bunch of other things like that as well. That things come up all the time that we didn't intend and that we're constantly surprised about. I think that's one of the reasons. Not to go on too long about it, but that's one of the reasons we really built this game is that we wanted something we could come back and play and be surprised about. And I think that's one of the best things about procedural content.
Absolutely. This has been Nelson for GamesMatter, and we've had Jason and Brian for Caves of Cud. It's absolutely amazing. You can pick it up on Steam Early Access now. We're going to post a link to that in the chat, and if you cannot afford it, or if you just want to give it a chance to check it out before possibly buying it for your friends or all 500 of your best friends, doesn't matter. We don't judge. We encourage it. Yeah, you can do that by going to @GamesMatterHQ on Twitter and just asking. And in return, all we ask is your feedback. Every bit of feedback, coverage, and etc. really helps. I mean, these guys, they're worth supporting. They do great stuff, and I'm glad that we had the chances to support you through our little bit today. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. This has been Nelson. Until next time, bye.